Time to take a look at one of the scariest units that's come out of Ritual of the Damned, the very shooty, nigh unkillable Grey Knight Paladins squad. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. This will be the channel's first Grey Knight video, and I've been getting a lot of requests for them over the last few weeks. In this video we'll take a look at the Paladins datasheet, all of the myriad of buffs that we can stack on them, and one way that I would run them on the table. In the background, the Paladins are the elite of an already elite order, each one having undertaken 8 quests to establish his character and cause, and is bound under one of the Grey Knight Grand Masters, for who he will act as a bodyguard, champion and advisor, and take his seat in the hallowed Hall of Champions on Titan. In a less elite chapter, Paladins might be captains or lieutenants in their own right. This really is a company of heroes. So let's see what a squad of these champions can do on the table. A Paladin squad is of course an elite's choice for Codex Grey Knights. You start off with just 3 Paladins, including their leader, who is called a Paragon, and they'll cost you 44 points a model, with their cheapest loadout of Stormbolter and Force Sword. You can include up to a maximum of 10 Paladins, putting a full tricked out squad of them at 440 points, as well as a Force Sword and a Stormbolter. They're also armed with frag and crack grenades and psych out grenades. Each Paladin has a basically boosted Terminator stat line, with movement of 5 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3+, strength and toughness 4, 3 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 2-up save. And of course they're also further protected by the Crux Terminatus for a 5+ invul save. So we can clearly see that Paladins are going to be quite a difficult prospect to remove from the battlefield. Being 3 wounds really helps keep them safe from a lot of the standard weapons that munch through Terminators, things like autocannons or plasma guns that have a flat damage of 2. A full squad of them will also put out a hideous amount of attacks in close combat. It'll be 40 with shock assault, presuming no other buffs, and as they all have force weapons, every attack is at damage d3. Now the Paladins do have some options. They can replace their force swords with any weapons from the melee weapons list. This of course includes all of the standard options Grey Knights have for them, allowing them to swap out their standard force sword for a force hellbarge for strength 5 but AP -2, a nemesis warding stave for strength 6 only AP -1 but better invul in close combat, or 2 nemesis falchions which only AP -2 but allow an additional attack. Finally, you also have the option of a nemesis demon hammer for 13 points, which is essentially a thunder hammer with the nemesis keyword. Out of these, my favourite are the Nemesis Falchions. That extra attack for the most part outweighs the -1 AP that you lose against the vast majority of targets. It's only really when you're fighting something that's got a 2-up save and no invul save at all that you're going to be better off with the Nemesis Force Sword out of the 2, and that's honestly quite rare, as most things that have 2-up armour tend to be rocking invuls as well. It's certainly not a bad idea to include 1 warding stave in the squad, just to give them some initial extra invul in close combat should they get charged by something very nasty, and a demon hammer or 2 certainly couldn't go amiss for dealing with heavy targets, particularly as you can remove them last from the squad to get the maximum value out of them. If you are rocking a demon hammer, I'd put it on the Paragon, as the Paragon is the squad sergeant, and instead of having the normal +1 attack, he has +1 to his weapon skill instead, so he hits on a 2+ and better counteracts the demon hammers -1 to hit. Demon hammers will cost you an additional 12 points over those standard force weapons, by the way. Secondly, the Terminators can replace their Stormbolters with special weapons from the special weapons list. These are the Incinerator, Silencer and Psy Cannon. Upgrading to the Silencer just costs an extra 2 points over the standard Stormbolter and gives you a heavy 6 weapon with strength 4, AP nothing and damage d3. So in general will typically be worth it unless you're planning on using the Cybolt ammunition for the squad every single turn, in which case it's a little bit more of a take or leave. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the Incinerators, unfortunately. That short 8-inch range means that it can only target units that are right up close to the Paladin squad, and if the units are right there, then there's a good chance they're just going to get absolutely destroyed in close combat in a second anyway, so I'd be investing in longer ranged anti-infantry guns myself. The final option is the Psy Cannon, which is 5 points more than the Stormbolter, and you get strength 7, AP -1 and heavy 4 for this. But sadly it's still only damage 1. To be honest, Psy Cannons are just a little bit underwhelming at the moment. They're only ever going to do small amounts of chip damage to your opponents, though admittedly in a Paladin squad it might be shooting for a long amount of the game as they're so durable. Personally, I think I'd tend to keep with the storm bolters and silencers myself, but there's nothing too wrong with fielding psi cannons if you feel like it. Now we come to special rules. They have the standard and they shall know no fear, shock assault for the extra attack on the charge, and bolter discipline, which means they'll be always rapid firing with those storm bolters all the way out to 24 inches. They have teleport strike, meaning that you can set them up from reserve, and it might depend a bit on the opponent that you're playing as to whether or not you do. Unusually for slow moving melee units, Paladins are actually fairly scary enough at range and durable enough with their new options to be able to take a bit of a beating and walk forward to bully the midfield. So I'd say you certainly have the option of either starting on the board or putting them in reserve. They have the normal Grey Knight's Demon Hunters rule to reroll wound rolls against demons with all of those force weapons and really mess them up. And they have Rites of Banishment for either a 1 wound smite against normal targets or 3 wounds against demons, and this can be increased with one of the Tides of Battle. Instead of this, they can of course manifest 1 power from the Sanctic discipline, and there really are multiple good options for what they take with this. Paladins are a unit that are going to want multiple psychic buffs on them if possible. Sanctuary to get them a 4+ invul save is certainly a great choice. Hammer Hand for +1 to wound rolls in melee will definitely help them out with any low strength force weapons they have. Gate of Infinity could have them teleporting around the battlefield at will, and Astral Aim could really allow them to cleanse whatever opponents they want, whether or not they're within line of sight of them, and also give them Ignores cover with all that Storm Bolter fire, which could be souped up considerably with Psybolt ammunition. So overall, the Paladin squad is an excessively durable, very dangerous melee threat that can also do psychic and decent shooting as well, though of course all of this ability does come with a price tag. I can best see them as a linchpin squad used in a Grey Knight army that you're going to be able to put multiple strong stacking buffs on, and really turn them from something that's already quite scary into something that's ludicrously destructive and durable. So having said that, let's take a look at these buffs. First of all, if we're playing in a full Grey Knights army, then you of course have access to Tides of the Warp. They're universally whole army affecting rules if every single model in your army is Grey Knights, and frankly most of these are good for Paladins. I think my favourite one is the Tide of Shadows for them, as another stacking defensive buff for them. This will allow your Paladins to get the benefit of cover even if they're not entirely on or in a terrain feature, which will essentially give them a 1+ save against standard enemy shooting, although of course 1s always fail. It will just mean that even when you're shooting at them with AP-3 weapons, they'll still be getting a 4+ save. If you do manage to put them in cover though, then they will also get a -1 to be hit as well, which is another great way to keep them safe from a decent chunk of enemy firepower, and keep them blazing away with their ammunition, and hopefully getting into combat with those scary force weapons. I could also see the Tide of Fury being useful. Having to reroll 1s in close combat to wound isn't a bad buff to melee damage output. It'll add the standard 17% damage output, which of course is likely to be quite a bit on such a huge squad. And we also have the Tide of Convergence, which is adding 1 to the strength and damage characteristics of infantry models with psi weapons. So you could have psi cannons that are damage 2 and strength 8, silencers that are strength 5 and damage D3+1, or storm bolters with the Psybolt ammunition stratagem that are strength 6, AP-1 and damage 2, which will really put a hurt on virtually anything. And of course they can also have flat 2 damage smites as well, although this is going to have more impact on the other units in the Grey Knight army that are cheaper and will be throwing around more smites than these guys. In terms of character support, naturally either Drago for full rerolls to hit, or any brother captains will certainly help with the damage output. We've already mentioned all the psychic powers that can buff them from the Sanctic discipline, and having multiple characters nearby them will allow you to stack multiple buffs onto this unit. From the Dominus discipline, there are also a few useful buffing psychic powers, and probably the best for the Paladins is Armoured Resilience. When you're resolving an attack that targets the unit of Paladins, subtract 1 from the wound roll. This is really decently powerful, as even las cannons will be wounding them on 3s, and anything strength 4 will need 5s to wound the Paladins. As well as this, Ethereal Manipulation can give them full rerolls to hit, provided they're targeting a unit close by, and Edict Imperator could be a way of getting a little bit more mobility out of your Paladins, as it will allow them to essentially move twice in one turn, although it will preclude them from charging unfortunately. Chaplain listeners also aren't such a bad choice for putting on what is potentially such a huge squad. Recitation of Projection could get them a fair bit of extra range on all of those nasty Stormbolter and Psy Cannon shots. Invocation of Focus could get an additional AP-1 on all of those. Force weapons. Litany of Faith could give them a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds if that's likely to be a threat. And Words of Power could have them re-roll the damage characteristic of those force weapons, again buffing them in close combat. As well as all this, we could certainly be setting up more Paladins on the field again with an Apothecary, who I think is certainly a solid pick to accompany their Paladin squad, particularly as again he can support them with more psychic powers. Grey Knight Paladins can also be buffed by a couple of Warlord traits. First to the Fray is certainly a great one, which means that you can re-roll failed charge rolls for your Warlord and friendly Grey Knight units that are within 6 inches of them. Making or not making a charge with Paladins could definitely be game changing, as you could be missing out on a whole load of attacks if the charge doesn't go well. In terms of relics, the Augurium Scrolls from Ritual of the Damned can cause exploding 6s on the force weapons that they have, meaning that every time they roll a 6 to hit, they count as scoring 2 hits rather than 1 hit for that attack. As if that wasn't enough, let's get into stratagems now. And as we've mentioned, the Paladins have several. We've already mentioned Cybolt ammunition to give them Strength 5 AP-1 Storm Bolters for a turn, that can be further augmented by the Tide of Convergence. Honour the Chapter for 3 command points could certainly be worth it on a big Paladin squad, particularly if it's going to kill an extra enemy unit or 2, preventing them from striking back or getting away next turn. Psychic Onslaught could be used to augment some Psycannon fire by improving their strength and AP by -1, though it is quite pricey at 2 CP. From Ritual of the Damned we have Transhuman Physiology, which will cause a 1-3 wound roll to fail, which could be quite relevant when targeting Paladins, as the enemy is likely to be firing big heavy weapons at them. Masters of Combat is a 2 CP Paladin specific stratagem from Ritual of the Damned. This is essentially a fight when you die type stratagem, so if you're expecting your Paladins to be taking a lot of casualties, every Paladin that's removed will get to fight one last time before you remove him from the board. Could certainly be worth it to drag down the unit that was killing a lot of your Paladins if they've just been charged by something very scary. Dynamic Insertion could be used if you want to set up the Paladins right close to the enemy, and they can be put anywhere that's greater than 3 inches away from enemy models to make the best use of their Storm Bolter fire and any stacking shooting buffs that they have, though this will stop them from charging in the next turn, which could be an issue. Bring Down the Beast is a 2 command point damage boosting stratagem that again could be used to boost the ranged fire of the Paladins. You use it when they target a vehicle or monster with their ranged attacks, and until the end of the phase you can re-roll the wound roll. Again, if you are going for maximum shooting stacking buffs, if you're hitting with Strength 6, AP-1 damage 2 weapons, then you're likely to be causing an absolute ton of wounds with this. Fury of the Proven is a nice simple damage boost for the Paladins either in the shooting or fight phase, 1 command point to add +1 to the hit roll. So typically going to be a nice uncomplicated 25% damage buff to the unit, that again will combo with anything else that they have going. Redoubtable Defense is one of the damage prevention stratagems that can be used to make your unit tougher again. It's 1 command point if you have 5 Paladins or less, or 2 command points if you have more than that. This one will cause your opponent's attacks to have 1 less damage than they had before. So say if they are being shot by damage 3 weapons that are very efficient against them, you could activate this and they'd be damage 2 weapons, which should roughly half the damage output of the squad against 3 wound models. This is a really strong one indeed for saving your Paladins from being gunned down too early, and it's going to make it an absolute pain to chew through the Paladin squad while this is active. So a frankly awesome amount of stratagems and defensive and offensive buffs that you can put on the Paladin squad, meaning that you have a lot of different plays that you can make with them, choosing when to activate these buffs, and you can have them potentially being a strong firepower unit to an absolute monstrous melee threat, to a complete bastion of resolute silver armour that isn't going to go anywhere anytime soon. So how would I run a Paladin squad on the table then? In general I would prefer to run them as a 10-man squad that's the centrepiece of your army, although I could see uses for smaller squads. They're still going to be very powerful, even with just 5 men in them, or even potentially as minimum squads to provide a annoying deep strike threat that the enemy is going to have to dedicate significant resources to removing. In general though, I would run them as a 10-man, and I'd have to think quite carefully pre-game as to which of the main stratagems I'd be most likely to go down. If I was absolutely certain that I was going to be using Cybolt ammunition on them most games, and I had the spare command points to do so, I'd be tempted to give them all Storm Bolters and leave it at that. If not though, I'd be very tempted to upgrade a bunch of them to silencers as well. I've already mentioned that my favourite weapon is the Falchions, supplemented by a demon hammer or 2, and maybe a warding stave for some extra close combat defence. From there, it'd be a bit of a decision as to how much you invest in terms of character support for them. I certainly think that these guys would synergize amazingly with Caldor Drago, as getting full rerolls to hit with all of those very nice shooting options and very nice combat options is just going to really push their damage through the roof. In terms of spells, I'd absolutely want to be running at least one Psyker with the Dominus Discipline for that Armoured Resilience spell, which I think is one of the most powerful and easiest defensive buffs that we can put on them, and are really going to make them a nightmare to shift. If they're starting on the board, I'd certainly be wanting to start in the Tide of Shadows if possible, and ideally somewhere in a terrain feature, somewhere central and close to the enemy where they can move up and make their presence felt, but also gain that nice -1 to hit at least turn 1. We'd have to think carefully as to whether or not they need to start on the board, or whether it's going to be more profitable to deep strike, maybe alongside a character rocking the first to the fray warlord trait. From there you really have a ton of options with the choices that you can make for stratagems to get the most out of them, either offensively or defensively. Between Cybolt Ammunition, the Tide of Convergence, and potentially Bring Down the Beast, you could have them being an absolutely monstrous shooting unit that will chew through virtually any vehicle. With that little combo going off with Drago nearby, they put out an average of 20 wounds on even an Imperial Knight, just in the shooting phase, never mind close combat, and that's when they're rocking all Stormbolters. You might be a little bit limited as to what you can charge due to their slow movement, but you can certainly try and mitigate this to some extent with either Deep Strike, Gator Infinity, and maybe the First to the Fray Warlord trait, to at least get them a rerollable 9-inch charge. If you can get them any charges off though, then it will be very helpful, as you can use the charge roll to reposition them quite a lot, and maybe focus on just as much as the mobility as to how many enemy models you're actually killing. Once in combat, I'd certainly consider Honour the Chapter, and the stratagem to fight when they die if they are likely to be taking heavy casualties from a serious melee threat. If you can manage to tri-point an enemy unit with the Paladins, then you're likely to be causing them a massive headache, as they really won't want Paladins killing that unit that they tri-pointed, then shooting something else, then charging something else in your turn. That could well be a complete game-winning move. When it comes to the enemy turn, you really need to think about the various stratagems and defensive buffs that you can layer on them. Don't forget about transhuman physiology to shrug off some heavy weapon fire, nor redoubtable defense, particularly if you're being shot by flat damage 3 weapons, which are really going to feel the brutal reduction in their damage characteristic. Overall, Paladins really are one of the core units of Grey Knights, and one that you could certainly base an entire army's strategy around, feeding them enough buffs from characters, stratagems, and psychic powers to make them into something truly monstrous, and potentially beat down large portions of the enemy army between their shooting and melee prowess. I'm pretty certain we'll be seeing some competitive Grey Knight armies break through that are using them, and it'll be interesting to see what are the best combos and synergies that really shine through. Let me know if you've had any experience using Paladins since the new Psychic Awakening book, which has given them so much more life. They really are an interesting unit, and finally one that I do think actually bears up to the fluff, where they are a very hard to kill, very scary threat on the table. If you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to Auspex Tactics. Hopefully we'll have a few more Grey Knights videos coming out in the future. I'm particularly looking at the Strike Squad and the Dread Knight for the next couple of reviews, so stick around if you'd like to see that. Hopefully I'll be around about once a week. If you've been enjoying the content recently and would like to help out by supporting the channel, then I do have a Patreon page. Links in the description below. Any support would be greatly appreciated, as making these videos does take quite a long time. There are also some benefits there, such as early videos, voting on the future of the channel, and access to some of my own tournament lists and reports. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.